Welcome to Perspectives in Peds, or PIP for short, your go-to podcast for insights into paediatric practice. From clinical approaches and emerging research to the everyday wins and challenges, we bring you OT perspectives that inform, inspire, and spark conversation. Hello. Welcome, Danni and Alyssa.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for coming. Today, we are doing a part 2 to our chat on puberty, which Alyssa joined me for last time, but we've got Danni on the couch this time.
Replacing Cowie.
Yeah. So I thought to start, I'll do a little recap from our last episode, and hopefully anyone who's tuning into this episode has listened to that past one. And last time I was joined by Alyssa and Caitlin Cowie, where we covered what puberty actually was developmentally and why it's starting earlier now than it might have in previous generations as well. And that puberty really is something to be considered and touches on really every aspect or goal area that we as clinicians often address. So emotional regulation, self-care, social participation, body image, all of those kinds of areas. We also talked about the importance of early education last time, the risks of children filling in those gaps by themselves and finding that information in different places or unfiltered sources. And the OT's role in supporting families and not replacing parents in this scenario, but that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. So today we're really hoping to extend on that conversation and talk more about how we as clinicians can support parents and caregivers to feel more confident in being puberty educators. Sound good?
Oh, yeah. I'm excited for this one.
Yeah. So to start off with, we thought it might be helpful just to come back to like, what are we actually referring to when we're talking about puberty, and what is, I guess, more of the definition of that life stage?
Sure. I've got it in front of me because I'm not a walking dictionary. But I've got here that puberty is the development stage of life where a child matures from being a kid into being more of an adult. And it's often categorized by being able to sexually reproduce. And we know that the changes, like we spoke about with the shifting needs last episode, can be cognitive, physical, all of the above. So lots of new things happening in this stage of life.
Yeah. And something that we spoke about, but what will be our focus here is that it is a conversation that needs to be had. And
many conversations.
Yes, many conversations. It's not something that, yes, all our bodies go through that change, but it's so important that we are understanding why those changes are happening. So when I ask you this question, I'd love to know like what pops into your mind, but why do you think parents are perhaps not feeling confident or avoiding these conversations with kids, either before puberty has even occurred or as it's happening as well?
I feel like there's lots of reasons why. I would probably say the experience that I've had with some of my families has been around almost like embarrassment from like the parents, feeling as though they don't know when to do it or how to speak about it, and even like understanding what like age appropriate language to use and those sorts of things. And I think previously in different generations, perhaps the conversation weren't happening as openly as we would hope for them to happen now. So I feel as though my parents have been more comfortable in the silence of not talking about it and just avoiding it a little bit more because they feel embarrassed to talk about it themselves.
One of the best expressions that I've ever heard, and anyone who's listened to me on the pod would know that I love an expression or a quote or all of the above, but one of the best expressions that I've heard about this is "you're awkward is not their awkward."
Love that.
And I think that really encapsulates one of the reasons why parents or caregivers steer away from this conversation or many conversations, because they're like, oh, it's uncomfortable and I don't know how to bring it up and I'm not sure what to say. And that's absolutely, I think, a huge part of that. And I think, as sort of Liz touched on, it also comes back to how those conversations were brought up with you as a child and how they were handled with you as a child. And that either, I think, you are impacted by those in a way that you either follow the lead of what your parents did. So you engage in the conversations as they did, whether or not that's just handing your child a book.
I was actually about to say, I got the girls' stuff book.
I don't even remember these conversations, to be honest.
Yeah.
Or I think you actively move against it. And I think that, either way, you're impacted by the way that it was managed for you when you were a child.
I wonder as well if there's an element of like this generation, like assumed ability to find the information
That's a good
more
point.
independently because there's more platforms and more access now. Like, I mean, I had to dial up to get onto the internet, showing my age, but like kids do have access. And I know that we did start by saying that, previously we'd talked about that kids might find this information through unfiltered sources and that kind of thing. But I wonder if there is like a unconscious assumption on a lot of caregivers' behalves around that, like they'll find the information somehow. And I know that that also brings in the conversation of like assuming school will educate or it's part of the curriculum.
And that's what I was going to say, Katie. I have one specific experience with a client that I remember that this client got to upper adolescence and didn't know a lot, and this specific client had an intellectual disability and was at a mainstream school, and the caregivers had said to me, we just expected that school would fill in the gaps. And I think that is a common misconception. I think the other thing is, and this is something that Liz and I had touched on before before meeting on the pod today, was there's a stark difference. Like they are literally two completely different things, having a conversation about puberty and having a conversation about sex.
Yeah.
So if caregivers are like, oh yeah, we've had that conversation, it should never just be that conversation. It should be many conversations, but also the conversation about the birds and the bees and conception and sex is a different conversation. It's related, but it's a different conversation to the puberty conversation. And I know that different schools have different curriculums in which they will deliver both of those things. And some schools will do neither and some schools will only do one and not the other. Yeah. So really important to bear that in mind as well when we are talking about puberty, which is what we're talking about today. It is related to sex and conception and change in romantic feelings towards another individual perhaps, but it is different from the sex conversation.
I love that.
It's a really good point.
So, and we will get into how to support families, caregivers, parents to feel more confident in having these conversations. But what do you think unhelpful puberty education looks like? And I know, Danni, you've just touched on it a little bit there, but what other things pop into your mind?
I think talking from the point that you just raised, Danni, that one big conversation is probably not the way to go. Definitely not the way to go. I think sitting down and almost inundating or over-explaining just in one sitting is very overwhelming for a child. And I think we really need to meet them where they are at with the questions that they are asking us. And Danni and I, we spoke today about how when a child comes to us and they ask us a specific question, as the caregiver, we want to do the best job that we can to answer that specific question without straying or adding too many other details around what we feel as though they could be asking or insinuating. We're just answering that direct question that they've asked us specifically. So a multitude of conversations, just opening that door so the child feels really safe and secure with the caregiver, and they know that when they have questions, they can just come to mum or to dad or whoever it is and chat.
I think that I follow a social media page that specifically, and we'll put it in the show notes because I think we should reference them, that specifically talks about these conversations as a drip, drip, drip method and that basically you should drip, drip, drip information constantly so that they're adding to their understanding of puberty as opposed to just having it all poured out in the one conversation and be like, this is everything from start to finish. And that's, I think, one of the challenges or one of the risks that we face when parents just give books, which can be really quite I guess can be a challenge or a a not great way to have the one of the conversations, because the information may not necessarily be tailored to that child's level of cognition and intellect and understanding, but it also might just is likely far too much information.
Yeah. It's funny, like when you say that, it kind of pops into my mind that when you just give a book and you don't have a conversation, it still kind of keeps that topic as taboo. Like we're not going to talk about it. We all know this information, but we don't talk about it.
That's it.
I think there's nothing wrong with having a book, like being provided a resource is very valid.
Having a visual to refer to.
For me, I feel like it's really important that the parents have actually read it through and they understand what the information is so that it will support their conversation. I think it should be a resource the resource should be used as a support, not just as the whole conversation.
That's it. And it can be quite confronting as well, because a lot of the images in these books are anatomical images of penises. They are anatomical images of what happens when menstruation occurs. Yep. And without the context of being able to ask a question and refer that back to what does that mean for my body and all of those kinds of things, it does pose a risk of having a shroud of shame, but it also poses the risk of misunderstanding the information and creating fear around it potentially.
Is there any differences, do you think, in how parents might unhelpfully provide puberty education between boys and girls?
Ooh, that's a great one. I do feel as though people may have the assumption that girls need more information than boys, because I would say that for women or for girls, puberty does start very much on the outside. We can really tell when a young woman has started puberty because of breast budding and things like that, and then perhaps because it's more on the outside that we feel like we need to inform them sooner, or perhaps because menstruation, there's different steps in terms of like the hygiene around that we need to teach, that I feel the assumption can sometimes be that boys will just, I don't know, figure it out. We don't see that they've started going through puberty perhaps until they've got broad shoulders and they've just had a growth spurt.
And their voice has dropped.
Exactly right. But we know that the first step of that is, enlarging of testes. So it's kind of more hidden and behind closed doors, I guess. So I feel that there can be a misconception definitely with genders.
I think that possibly one of the mistakes that can be made is that parents think that they only need to provide puberty education relevant to that gender.
Yeah,
and I am the parent of a daughter and a son. My son is only 11 months old, so we haven't really started providing him with education around puberty.
Why not?
But my 5-year-old, almost 6-year-old, I said to Liz, she's been trying to put liners in her underwear since she was like 18 months old, in her nappies, because we are quite a body positive family and quite an open family in a lot of ways. And she's had a lot of inadvertent puberty education throughout her younger years, just because it's something that we openly talk about a lot of things. And she actually has baths with her younger brother. And so she does notice the differences between their bodies. And so she has a lot of education around, she knows that he won't get breast tissue in the same way that she will get breast tissue. And she knows that he won't get his period like she will get her period. And I was telling Liz as well that my best friend has a little boy and he's 4 years old and he knows all about his mum's period. And that is actually really helpful for him in understanding just biologically how males and females differentiate. But also if he is a young man who grows up to be in a heterosexual relationship, it's really helpful for him to understand what his partner is going through and the ins and outs of all of that as well. Or if he has daughters.
And what it means like the weeks prior to and that kind of thing. And I think we did touch on it as well, but something else that does pop to my mind from more a like unhelpful perspective is, like we said earlier, like waiting until the child is already experiencing changes or already going through puberty. And I think back to my sister's a nurse as well. So whether it's different coming from also like medical backgrounds and that kind of thing for parents and their confidence. But I remember my niece, she hadn't gone through puberty, but she felt really confident to be able to embrace that she could help her friends if their periods started when they were at school and that kind of thing. So I think confident parents equals confident kids as well in this scenario, I think.
Knowledge is power.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when we are thinking about our role as clinicians, how can we bring this topic up with families, and what might it look like in session when you're trying to build their confidence and competence in providing that education to their kids?
This is something that I feel that I've probably done quite well in my sessions with my clientele. I think I've been really fortunate in that a lot of my clients over the last few years have been in that prepubescent and pubescent age range. So I've had a lot of experience in sort of broaching these conversations with families. And I find the best way to bring this up is in our goal setting and therapy planning sessions. So often I will sort of ask how social participation is going, how their emotional regulation is going, how their self-care is going. And then I will often bring into the conversation elements of puberty that I know will be around about happening for this child in give or take a certain period of time. So, for example, if I'm talking about self-care with boys, I'll often, and they're sort of 10 years old or 9 years old, I'll often start bringing up deodorant. They've got body odor yet? Do they know what deodorant is? All of that kind of stuff. If I'm working with a young girl, I'll often talk about menstruation. Do they know what their period is? Do you have a period pack? Yeah. Those kinds of things. So starting to get a bit of just bringing the parents' awareness to that. But I think the other thing it does is bring the parents' awareness to this is something that occupational therapists do. Yeah. Because I think that it's what we do if the parent has tried to do it and there has been some kind of barrier or challenge that has arisen, or the parent has not yet done it because they don't feel competent and confident to be able to do it.
And I think that's a really huge part of our role is to like give permission to like not have it all figured out. Like It's okay to not even know where to start with these conversations, but that doesn't equal avoidance.
No. And I should say, like Katie, you touched on it before, being a health professional, it definitely, for me, improves my ability to have the information to be able to convey it. But I follow that many social media pages so that I know how to have those conversations with my own children. So it's definitely not just I don't feel super comfortable just because I have the information either. But I think, that's the other thing is sort of just planting that seed with parents to be like, it's okay that you feel awkward about this. But when we feel awkward about it, we still need to be able to move past that awkward so that we can equip our children with the knowledge so that they can cope the best way that they know how.
Yeah.
I like that point actually, and I've worked with some of the families around talking it through what parts of it makes it feel embarrassing. So helping them, kind of coaching them and being like, how was it delivered to you? What was your experience around puberty? Was it a conversation that you never had and the book got dropped on your bed?
It's almost like shark music, but in a different context.
Absolutely makes me think of attachment. Yeah. Absolutely. Was your parent being with you in your puberty knowledge? Or were they absolutely
Did they drop a book on your bed?
Yeah, that's it.
Exactly. And I think having like the time and the space to allow the parents to practice having some of these awkward conversations is always a good way to do it. Sometimes I've asked, how would you bring up menstruation, or have you thought about the conversation of shaving, let's say, for instance, and how comfortable do you feel? So it can be great to do it in your goal setting kind of sessions, but I find having parent sessions just one-on-one can be a really nice way to help them to feel kind of secure and equipped with the conversation whenever it does arise, I guess.
Maybe looking at like scripting for them or role-playing it or something in their parent sessions, because I love that point of what makes it feel uncomfortable or embarrassing for you, because if they're also someone I know historically, and I know that there's in younger generations of parents, there's really trying to be a shift in like using anatomical language and that kind of thing. But if they feel weird literally using the anatomical terms with their kid, like working through that with them and providing them education around why it's important to use those terms and that kind of thing.
I think the other thing that sometimes can be helpful for parents as well is equipping them with the knowledge of things that might come up for their kids and how they might be able to manage those things. So I know, for example, like questions around like, well, can I see the inside of my vagina?
Yeah.
And how, like, if you're talking about menstruation and they're trying to understand what actually happens in terms of the whole reproductive system, what if they ask for a mirror? Like, do you feel comfortable providing that so that they can see what they actually look like, and helping them sort of navigate some of those potential things that may come up so that they don't feel absolutely caught off guard when it does happen, because that's how sometimes we can change into that shame shroud, I guess, over the conversation. And knowing then that if a parent does, because we all do, at times not know how to respond to questions and then accidentally respond in a way that might promote shame.
Or shock.
Or that then in turn making the child not want to talk about it further.
Yeah.
That we can always repair that.
Yeah.
That can be a rupture, but we can always repair it and we can come back and we can discuss it. So I think checking in with families. So even if you have a family that's like, oh, I feel pretty confident answering questions about menstruation, even saying to them, cool, once you've had that conversation, let's check in again. Let's see how it went. Let's see how it landed, how you felt things were, and if you feel like your child has a good understanding and knows that they can come to you to ask more questions, so that that parent knows that they then have permission to come to you and speak to you about it again. Because I think, again, it comes back to this idea that it's not just one conversation.
Yeah.
And equipping parents with that idea that it's not just one conversation is really, really important.
I love that. And I think giving permission to the parents that they don't have to have it all figured out or that they have to be an expert. They just have to be, well, they want to create a space where the child feels like they're approachable.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that might be a lot of parent work. That might take a lot of parent work for a parent to get to a point where they feel comfortable with that. And it's a big part of that, maybe equipping them with the materials that they feel helps them portray that information. So it could be social media pages, it could be books, it could be podcasts, it could be whatever helps them feel like they have enough information to provide their child with enough information.
Yeah.
I think the parents' regulation, like co-regulation in that as well, like they may have all the resources and all of the things, but they may need some strategies on how to, I guess, sit in their discomfort as they're discussing it as well. So some co-regulation strategies don't go awry in these conversations too.
Well, I guess that then brings me to like when you've got a parent in front of you that you're feeling, they're a confident, like puberty educator. What does that look like from the clinician seat?
I think for me, a big part of that is if they're not awkward talking about it with me or visibly uncomfortable talking about it with me, even if they're dying on the inside, if they're not physically showing discomfort, I usually, even if they don't really like have a full understanding of how to articulate what puberty is for both sexes, I typically find that they're not uncomfortable. And that's the other thing is a parent who's willing to be a learner is often a parent who will be a confident puberty educator because we actually don't have to have the answers. So there has been times where my daughter has asked me questions and I've been like, man, I don't know. Like, let's look that up together. Like that's a great
feeling
question.
Comfortable just being like, what do you already know about it? Or tell me what you think.
Yes.
Being curious is also opening the conversation.
Yeah, so I think a parent who shows that they're willing to be a learner is often a really good sign of a puberty educator. And I think a parent who is able to, and I know it sounds bad, but able to veil their discomfort. I feel like that is because sometimes in those moments with our children, we actually need to. We need to be the hands. We need to be like, you know what, girlfriend, we got this. Even if I don't have your answer, I'll find it out for you. Like,
so true.
Yeah.
I think another thing to add to the list, which we did touch on last episode, was around the parents being an advocate for the child and for the stage that they're up to. So having quiet conversations with the people around them, the other adults around them, to not discuss the changes, the physical changes that perhaps they are noticing. Just making sure that the parents or the adults around the child are perhaps informed but also aren't prying too much. I think that's probably a really big one. Being an advocate is a great
And I think we've all been
thing.
in a situation where we've had some extended family member make a comment about either our physical appearance or that your cousin's voice has dropped or like something like that. And we also have all been in that life stage where we're feeling awkward and weird in our body and different, and it doesn't help when people make comments about it. So I think that's a huge point list that a parent or caregiver being a quiet advocate as well can be really powerful.
I've got a bit of a tip for clinicians who think that they have a parent in front of them who is not necessarily a confident puberty educator, which will often happen, I think, is that equipping parents with scripts such as, thanks so much for asking me, that's a great question, can sometimes be enough in that moment. So it could be, thanks so much for asking me, that's a great question. Can I have a think on it and come back to you? Mm-hmm. That in itself opens up an acceptance and a safety in asking these questions. Equipping parents with that script just alone so that they can then be like, oh, man, how on earth am I going to broach this question?
Or come to session and be like, hey, can you help me work through this?
Exactly right. He asked me about what an erection is and I have no idea how to approach that, is being able to respond with, thanks so much for asking me, that's a great question. I'm going to find out some more information and come back to you, is actually enough to portray a sense of confidence.
Yeah, I like that.
It's very empowering as well.
It is.
Because the child knows that you're hearing them. It's not an awkward or uncomfortable conversation. You haven't tried to make it up, your answer.
No.
You're like, do you know what? I'm going to find this out for you and come back. And I think that's so empowering for both the child and for the parent.
That's it. And you don't have to have the answer on the spot. That's okay. You don't have to be like, oh, I know everything about puberty ins and outs. And as you said, Katie, like anatomical language, it's something that a lot of millennials didn't grow up with because they had all sorts of nicknames for body parts. And so changing that to use anatomical language can be really difficult. So there's definitely things that we have to change from our own childhood and from our own experiences, but being able to be equipped with something that's short, sharp, quick and easy to remember, like, thanks so much for asking me that. It's a great question.
Yeah.
Just gives you something to give back to them without shutting down the conversation.
Yeah. The only other point that we haven't really touched on is I know we've spoken about, like giving children books or resources, that kind of thing, but having the parent actually be aware of what they're handing over and actually putting their eyes over it before they give it to their child is a huge one.
And I would say actually reading it with your child.
Yeah.
So
questions will come up as they look at it.
It's a great idea. Actually, even just being in the vicinity, you don't have to sit right next to them, but having it in the lounge room, that it's something, and that will vary from child to child, of course, but you know your client.
Yeah.
And I think that having a conversation with a parent about that, like, how do you think it's best to deliver this information? And if it's via a book, how can we do this in a way that still places you as the best person to answer their questions as opposed to the internet?
Most definitely. And I think helping the parent to help the child reflect on what they've learned is always a good thing as well. So even if you have given them the book and you've put your eyes over it and that sort of thing, it's like, tell me what you found out in chapter 4, talk to me about that. And then from there, the questions might come, or you might be able to gauge, have they understood this in the correct way? And how can we then relate it to themselves and their body?
Yeah. Absolutely.
I think as clinicians, we can support families to know where to, like, what is a good resource or what to look for. Sort of like a sidetrack there, but I remember seeing a Facebook post recently on, I think it was on an OT Facebook page, and they had flagged that they were trying to create like a menstruation visual for a client using AI, and it had flagged it. But it wouldn't generate like
God forbid we
like
talk
visuals
about
of
women's menstruation.
Vulvas and that kind of
Wild.
thing. So I think because, we as clinicians might have access to Boardmaker or paid visual development type software, but parents will often look to AI or that kind of thing to generate things for their kids. So I think knowing as clinicians how families can, build visuals for their
Or
kids.
use us as a resource.
Or use us or ask where they should go. I remember seeing that and just being like, oh, for goodness sakes, like just another barrier.
Yeah, absolutely.
But important for us to be aware of if parents are like, well, I tried making visuals.
AI said no.
And I can't draw. So. All right. So as a little bit of a reflection, I'd love to have a think, like, before we wrap up, like, what's a challenge that you'd like to give clinicians listening, or what's something that you'd like them to really take away from this and trial in their sessions?
I think it's to ask ask the awkward questions.
Yep.
Does your child know about wet dreams?
Yeah.
Does your child know about erections? Whatever it might be. When you're talking about those developmental domains, that self-care, that productivity, that leisure, and thinking about the age of the child that you have in front of you, ask those what may be awkward questions.
Yeah.
Choose one.
I like that.
Yeah,
Liz?
work it into your day-to-day practice, whether that's the intake or perhaps like parent sessions and that sort of thing. Having that as a script for yourself as a clinician is really helpful, because you yourself as a clinician might find talking about puberty hard too. So I think having a script for yourself is always good.
Yeah.
And perhaps on top of that is having a little bit of a brainstorm of, you might have an overarching question of what does your child know about puberty, but the parent might actually need individual prompts as to what that means. So what would be some questions you would ask a parent of a child who was biologically female, and what are some questions that you would ask of a parent whose child is biologically male, and use those as your prompts.
Yeah, I love that. Kind of thinking like as takeaways, like as clinicians, like puberty is always on our caseload. It's just
Always.
like thinking about it in this way helps us to think about, as occupational therapists in particular, that's the hat that I have on,
Yes.
is what impacts may it be having on their daily participation, or not even necessarily impacts, but hurdles or obstacles that it may present.
Yeah.
But also reassuring parents that they don't have to have all the answers here.
That's it.
And that we are creating a safe space so that they can hopefully create the same with their child as
Yeah.
well.
Be the hands. For those of you not familiar with circle of security,
Be the hands.
you
the
are
hands.
you are absolutely their stable base and
Yeah.
their secure base and their go-to.
Well, thank you. I love these chats.
Thanks for
I
having
hope
us.
listeners love them as well, because it's a little bit more grey as to, okay, what do I then like do with this information and put it into practice for me, and what does it look like? So hit us up with your questions if you've got them as well.
Absolutely. Liz and I are putting together a new PD booster
Yes, we are.
For OT Link.
for OT Link
Great.
on puberty
So
specifically.
stay tuned. There
absolutely.
might be part 3. We'll see.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
But any resources or Instagram accounts or anything that we think are helpful as well, we'll pop them in the show notes.
Absolutely.
And I will see you both hopefully very soon for different topics.
Thanks so much,
Thanks for
Katie.
joining me.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks,
Bye.
Danny.
Bye.